Hi everyone. So in this hopefully rather short video, I'm just going to talk about buzzwords that happen in debating. So particularly if you're new to debating, i.e. if you're going to Bogwall or you've just come back from Bogwall, you'll often have heard maybe some judges or some teams use words that don't really make any sense, as in words like derivative or burden or impact, etc. And you might be like, I don't know what that means. This is a very short presentation just to explain, like bingo, what all of these words actually mean, hopefully meaning you find the game a bit more enjoyable if you continue in it, and I hope you do. So I'm just going to walk through the buzzwords of BP debating insofar as the meta I appreciate it to be. So I'm going to break this down to buzzwords that involve analysis, as in logic that teams use to prove things, buzzwords in how judges use them, and then buzzwords more generally in debating. So the first word you might have heard is delta. So teams will often, maybe especially in POIs, especially if they're schoolies, be like, you haven't proved a delta. What is your delta? I remember when I first heard this, I was like, what on earth are you talking about? And it took me 4 competitions to work out what the word delta meant. So delta is just the reality of your argument, as in, is your argument proven? Does it actually cause a change in the world? So the burden of a debate, either on proposition or opposition or on any argument you can ever do, as in if you're trying to persuade your friend of something, like they should go out and date that person, the delta of whether or not the person should go out to date is, have you actually proven that they should go out to go and date that person? Have you proven the incentives actually mean that they should change their mind? That's what delta means. Burden. You might have heard this done by extension speakers or by judges, where they're like, you have not satisfied your burden. What we mean by burden is the questions that the idea needs to be answered, needs to have answers to before it is believed. So if once again, back to the analogy of persuading your friend to date somebody, the burden that your friend places upon you when you're trying to convince them to date someone is, why is this a good thing? Why is the things that you think are going to be good from me asking this person out actually good? Those are the questions they have to have answered before they believe you that you are correct. As in, this person is a good person to date, or I would be successful if I go and ask this person out. That is the burden of the argument. The point of debating is to justify why the things you're trying to claim happen actually do happen, and is your burden to do so. Tipping point. So you might have heard the word tipping point in ways in which teams respond to each other. What tipping point means is the way you can satisfy burdens is by arguing that something is true. But you can provide a reason why something is true that doesn't actually convincingly demonstrate that thing is true. So returning to the analogy of telling your friend to date somebody, you might be like, you should date that person because he will make you feel, or she will make you feel, or they will make you feel very happy. However, that doesn't reach a tipping point. I'm unsure why it actually does make me sufficiently more happy, why it will actually make me happy. A tipping point is just a sufficient collection of reasons that actually creates the change in the debate or the reason why the argument accrues, as in why actually this person will make your friend happy. Is if you provide sufficient number of reasons or sufficient strength of reasons to make the change happen, then you've reached your tipping point. If you don't, then you haven't. The point of debating in terms of persuasiveness is to reach this point where the judges and the room around you is convinced that your thing that you're arguing does actually happen in the world. Comparative. So often teams, particularly responsive speakers, and particularly with POIs, or even judges or anybody in debating, may have said, you haven't proved a comparative, or rhetorically asked you, what's the comparative? What that means is debating doesn't exist, your arguments don't exist in isolation from other arguments in the round. So sometimes in debates, you might be tempted to run an argument about how the world changes, as in becomes a happier place. But opposition may also be able to argue that the world becomes a happier place because something changes in something about opposition side, i.e. the status quo, or the way their arguments are going to make the world change, actually also accrues being happy as well. So comparative is just a way of expressing the uniqueness of an argument for one side of the debate. It is also a way of expressing how the difference of the debate is, as in what does government get access to the opposition can't get access to? Why is what you're arguing only going to happen on your side, not the other side? This becomes more complex in more complicated debates, like regrets debates, where the debate is about what would have happened if the thing never happened in the first place. That is another example of a comparative, i.e. just what does this alternative world look like, or what does the world that other teams are arguing look like. This is something that is important to make arguments robust against challenges, but also generally persuasive. The intuition here, returning once again to the analogy of dating your friend might be, you're persuading your friend to date someone. The comparative would be like, yes, that person may make me happy, but I would have been happier if I never asked that person out in the first place. You, my friend, have to convince me that I would be less happy if I hadn't asked that person out, even than if I do ask that person out. That's what we mean by comparative. The last word you may have heard is derivative. So derivative is just a word that people use to explain repetition in arguments, i.e. the arguments, the reasoning, or the impact are repeated and thus shouldn't be credited again. In the rules of BP, you have opening and closing teams. Closing teams have to provide unique material above their opening. If a closing team just repeats potentially debate-winning material from their opening, they are derivative. They are not adding anything new and can't be credited with this, and thus can't be slide to a first just because another team has provided arguments that won the debate as well. You have to provide unique arguments, unique set of reasons, and unique impacts in the debate to not be derivative and thus to credit higher in the debate. Thus, the term derivative can often be used by teams to try to marginalize the significance of other teams, but also judges in trying to justify why a team places lower in the debate, maybe because they viewed their content as already existing in the debate, i.e. being derivative. Let's look at other judging buzzwords. So the first is OA. So you might have heard after a round that the chair might say, and the person that leads the discussion and gives a justification of the call, maybe like, we'll see you in 15 minutes for the OA. Or you might have heard, we're going to return for the OA in 15 minutes. All this stands for is an acronym for oral adjudication, which is a, hopefully, 15-minute explanation that the chair, or a panelist if the chair has been rolled, will give to try to explain why the call is the way it is. This is the opportunity for you to listen, to hear about the logic that the judge saw the debate existing in, and why the panel as a whole, or is in a split, decided the way it does. Oftentimes, oral adjudications are not there as a discussion for speakers against judges, but rather just to gain a degree of insight whilst passively listening to judges. Some judges, though, in oral adjudications will offer opportunities for interjection, but the general courtesy is only to do this if judges allow this and not to presume as if you can. You can always talk to the judges after the fact. Clashes. Many judges will try to organize their justification of the debate by clashes. What a clash means, quite intuitively, is just how teams are interacting with each other. So how judges saw how arguments persuaded each other differently, as in the ways one team arguments interacted with another, basically. So a clash could be who persuaded me more that people are actually adversely affected by this motion. This is the thing that we think determined the debate. This is the clash of the top half, i.e. and then the oral adjudication would proceed to explain why they thought one team was better able to prove people are harmed than another team. There could be many clashes of a debate, so there can be many sets of disagreements about what teams think are important. As in, some teams might argue one type of actor, like a minority, is more important than another type of actor, i.e. another minority or a majority, and within that they may argue that there are different effects on these groups, things like poverty versus abandonment versus happiness. These can be sub-clashes, as in sub-disagreements that make up a broader disagreement in the debate. The more complicated debates become, the more clashes exist in the round, and the more judges are expected to explain why one clash, to bear witness and awareness to the number of clashes that exist, and also to explain why each clash fell in the way they saw it fall, and why they thought one clash mattered more than another. The third thing you might hear judges say, particularly when justifying decisions, is that your team had a responsive burden, you did not satisfy it, and thus you placed lower in the debate. What responsive burden means is a judge thinks that you are equally as persuasive as the team that came before you, i.e. if you're closing government, opening opposition, or opening government, and if you're closing opposition, the other three teams that spoke before you, such that the judges needed an explicit justification for why what they said is either untrue or less true, importantly, less true than what you said, or less important than what you said. i.e., judges are not allowed to insert reasons to why they think you are more persuasive than other people. It is your job as a team coming later in the debate to explain this. That is your responsive burden. Judges may often use this term if you don't think you've proven either of those two things, and may place you lower in the call as a result. Splits. So, oftentimes, there are many judges that sit before you. One judge sits in the chair, will be the person that invites you to speak, will usually time keep, and will often give the oral adjudication. Then there are other judges that surround the chair, called panelists. Panelists participate in the discussion after the speakers leave, and they have if they're not a trainee, as in someone who's inexperienced, they will be able to vote on comparisons. So you might have a comparison between opening government and opening opposition, and there may be a disagreement on who wins that comparison. Here, some judges may vote for one team, like opening opposition, whereas other judges may vote for opening government to beat opening opposition and claim a higher rank in the debate. At this time, when the oral adjudication happens, the chair, if they want to give the OA and are in the majority, may express that a comparison, as in a second-third, was on a 2-3 split, i.e. 3 people voted for the team that got second to get second, whereas 2 people voted for the team that got the actual second to have actually got the third, i.e. for the comparison rank to be the other way around. Splits can often happen for various reasons, as in different opinions, but also different quality of judges, and sometimes splits can involve being rolled, as in chairs are in a minority on who they think won, and in those occasions, sometimes the chair may defer to a panelist to describe that comparison rather than the chair. The last thing that judges may talk about is things like engagement. What they mean by engagement is just how directly or implicitly interactive material is with each other, and specifically as seen by the judge. So different judges can see different types of engagements. So the better the judge you have, the more they're able to track implicit interactions, as in the way in which material is actually interacting with each other without having to explicitly flag it. So judges may try to argue that one team loses to another team because of a lack of engagement or a direct responsiveness or unclarity, whatever that word is. I'm actually being unclear again. How unclear certain material was in terms of why it's more important than others. Engagement is important because the point of debating is not just to stand up and make an argument and sit down, but to stand up and make a more persuasive argument than the teams that come before you, which involves engaging with other teams' metrics, other teams' analysis, other teams' arguments. Judges may use engagement as a metric to why teams should win if they engage more, or if they engage less, lose. So those are some examples of judging buzzwords you may have heard. Competition buzzwords. So there's a lot of buzzwords and terms that exist in competitions that might not be apparently obvious what they mean. The first is open rounds. So British parliamentary debating is often organised into a series of open rounds and closed rounds. Open rounds are the preliminary rounds, i.e. rounds 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, and 4, or 1, 2, 3, 5, depends who they want to open, where all teams are participating, and specifically you hear the oral adjudication. So judges will invite you to leave, will then talk about the debate for 15 minutes, and invite all the members of the team back in to discuss why they think that the call is the way it is. In open rounds, all teams hear the call, and all teams hear the oral adjudication. Because of things like logistical restraints, but also because they want to make things exciting, there are often closed rounds in competitions. In a 4-round competition, it's traditionally the last round, i.e. round 4, i.e. the last round all teams compete in. In some competitions, particularly 5-round competitions, round 4 and 5 will be closed. What this means is, at the time, only the judges will know what the call is, and the teams will not know what the call was until after the final deliberations have occurred, as in the break happens. You don't get an oral adjudication at all, but you're willing and able to, if you want to, approach the judges after the break for a justification and for an explanation for what the call is. Oftentimes the call will appear on tab. A tab is just a software that exists on a website that tabulates or spreadsheets what results happen for each team, and are often distributed well in advance of the competition and posted on social media after the competition, so you can explore how well you did and how well other teams did. Out rounds. In competitions, all teams compete in preliminary rounds, but a certain strata, a subsection of those teams who perform especially well, will enter into the out rounds, things like quarters, semis, finals, gold, silver, bronze finals. These certain number of teams only compete in those, and those are called out rounds. Speaks. As well as being ranked in a debate from first to fourth, individual speakers are also given points between 50 and 100 for the strength of their speeches, with 50 being completely incomprehensible gibberish, and 100 being, this is literally the God speaking to me. Speeches range within this, depending on your quality, obviously, but also just the type of judge you have, and how good your argument is. You can discover what your individual speaks are at the tab, on the tab after the after the end of the competition and the winners of the competition are announced. Speaks can also be important in breaking, as in sometimes there are too many teams with the same number of team points, as in the same number of firsts or seconds, and instead the competition is the out rounds are derived by the top 16 teams, with those being the highest of the speaks. Straights. You might have heard this before, whereby people will argue in order to get to the out rounds you need to acquire straights. What this just means is it's the baseline number of points, team points you need to accrue in order to get to the out round of a competition. For very many competitions, this is equivalent to a number of seconds. The way you can think about this is if you get a first in a round, this is equivalent to getting 3 team points. If you get a second, this is equivalent to 2 team points. Getting a third is equivalent to 1 team point, and getting a fourth is equivalent to unfortunately getting no team points for that round. In order to get to a competition, get to the out round, you must accrue the equivalent of 2 team points every single round. So this could look like in a 4-round competition, getting a second, 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 and second, but it will also be equivalent to getting a second, second, third, first, because those numbers add up also to 8. Some competitions have a tougher break, as in you have to get +1, as in you have to get equivalent to a second, 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 first. But in other competitions that are more lenient, you might be a -1 break, equivalent to getting a second, 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 third, or second, fourth, second, first. These are just what are required to get to an out round. To be honest with you, just perform your best, and the results will take care of themselves. Finally, I think this is finally at least, some speech buzzwords. So these are other types of buzzwords that speakers may use in their parlance that may be slightly confusing. What is signposting? So oftentimes the feedback you may get may be you need to signpost better in your speeches. This is just explaining to judges and to a certain extent other members of the debate what you're about to talk about and why it's important. Oftentimes, particularly if you witness more competent debaters, they will talk at millions of miles an hour, and within it they will signpost what they're going to do. I.e., I'm going to have 3 arguments. First, I'm going to explain to you why this affects women. Second, I'm going to explain why this means women become less able to work easily. And third, I'm going to explain why this is the biggest impact of the debate. This is signposting, just saying what you're about to do, and also an explanation for why it's the most important. Weighing. Weighing is a unique type of analysis that is just explaining why one claim or one argument should matter more or less than another claim in a debate. So other than debating being about responding to arguments and undermining their legitimacy and their truth, a second and more important aspect of debating is to presume that everything is true, but that some things are more important than other true things. That is what weighing is. Judges and teams will often express that weighing was important and is important whilst delivering their speeches or their oral adjudications. This is a skill that is very commonly necessary to do well in BP debating. We have some videos about it if you're interested in learning a bit more about it. Mitigatory. You might have heard teams respond to your responses to them by saying, telling the judges, you don't need to worry about that, that was mitigatory at best. Or judges saying, the responses you gave were good, but they were only mitigatory. What that means is your responses work, but only to a certain extent that is insufficient to defeat a claim, and also insufficient to make the judges think that the claim has no irrelevance or not as much relevance as necessary to win the round. As in, your responses diminish, but they don't disprove or delegitimize the claims made by other teams, those claims remain standing and remain with a sufficient level of power and persuasiveness to beat you. Mitigatory responses are important and they form the bedrock of rebuttal, but oftentimes you need to go a bit further than being mitigatory. If you're interested in rebuttal, look at past rebuttal video on the channel. Squirrel. Sometimes you may be accused of squirreling a motion. This is where teams don't debate in the spirit of the motion. For example, if you have the motion this house would ban drugs, and as a prime minister you'd say, we're going to ban some drugs, like cannabis or ecstasy, but not others like heroin. I don't know why you do it that way around actually, whatever, you know what I mean. You're going to ban only some drugs. This is an example of squirreling the motion. You're not debating what the CAs wanted you to debate, and nor are you debating what other teams in the round will accept is the metric of the substance of the debate. This can lead you to being massively discounted and leads you to a fourth. The general advice here is try to debate in best faith. Do not try to mitigate, don't try to make the debate something that isn't, because it just doesn't benefit the game as general and it won't benefit you and probably leads to a worse experience. The last thing you may have heard of in speeches is knifing. Some closing teams or responsive speakers to your claims may say that you have knifed another team, as in if you're closing government, you have knifed your opening. What this means is that they think you have made a claim that directly contradicts material that has come before you on your same bench. A rule of British parliamentary debating is there must be some degree of logical consistency in the things that you're arguing along a bench. So all members of government bench and all members of opposition bench must broadly argue the same frame or the same world that exists. As in, if opening government had said, we are going to ban all drugs, but then you as a member of government speaker stood up and said, actually, we're only going to ban heroin and not ecstasy, you are knifing your opening. You are contradicting something that they have said is actually happening in the debate. It means that material is discounted, and any argument that flows from that won't be held by the judge as illegitimate. Knifing is something that is sometimes hard to draw a line on. Sometimes you may contradict softly, as in you may explain that something that opening government thought would happen actually doesn't really happen in the world, because you just know it not to be happening. This is still a form of knifing, but it doesn't always mean that your material is thrown out. Knifing can require a level of nuance, but broadly speaking, you must not try to contradict your opening as best as you can. There are nuances here. If opening government has squirreled the motion, you are allowed to contradict them, and you are allowed to knife them, provided you explain to the judges why it is you're knifing them. As in, they squirreled the motion. If opening government in the debate about drugs had argued, we're only going to ban heroin, or we're only going to ban ecstasy, you as closing government as a member or a whip can knife your opening because they are squirreled the motion and it isn't in the good faith of the House, and you will get credited for doing so. So those are examples of buzzwords. I hope this is helpful, particularly if you're new to debating. We have plenty of other videos on the channel that I hope you will find useful. Comment, like, subscribe, stick around. Hope to see you around soon.